It began on a quiet Tuesday morning at the Willowbrook police station, the kind of day where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Officers were sipping coffee, sorting through routine paperwork, and complaining about the broken air conditioner. Among the usual pile of envelopes, court notices, community complaints, and reports, there was one letter that immediately stood out. It was smaller than the rest, its paper yellowed at the edges, and there was no return address. The handwriting on it was messy and uneven, the ink slightly smeared as though written by someone with trembling hands. The officer on duty, Sergeant Miller, frowned as he turned the envelope over. There were no postal markings, no stamps, meaning someone had likely dropped it off by hand. He slit the top open and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. The note inside contained only one short message. "There's a body buried under the old oak tree near Hollow Creek. Don't ignore this." "You've ignored too much already." For a moment he simply stared at the words, unsure if this was some kind of joke. It wasn't unusual for the station to receive prank letters or false tips, especially from teenagers trying to stir up attention. But something about this one didn't feel like a prank. The handwriting carried a strange sense of urgency, and the paper itself had faint smudges, as if someone had cried or spilled water over it. It was the kind of detail that made Miller's stomach twist. He called over the chief, who read the message silently, then glanced at the clock on the wall. There hadn't been a major crime in Willowbrook for months. Still, the letter mentioned a specific location, an old oak tree near Hollow Creek. That area hadn't been used for years. The creek had dried up and the land was overgrown with weeds. It wasn't the kind of place anyone visited anymore. The chief hesitated but finally decided to send a small team to check it out. "Just to be sure," he said. The officers prepared their gear, exchanging nervous jokes to hide their unease. None of them truly expected to find anything. As the patrol car drove off toward Hollow Creek, the letter sat on the chief's desk, its ink catching the light. No one realized that those shaky words marked the beginning of a mystery that would haunt their town forever. The drive to Hollow Creek was quiet, the kind of silence that made every sound feel louder than it should. The road curved through thick woods where sunlight barely reached the ground. When the patrol car stopped, the officers stepped out and were immediately met by the smell of damp soil and old leaves. The air was heavy and the mist hung low, curling around their boots as they made their way toward the old oak tree mentioned in the letter. The tree was hard to miss. Tall, ancient and twisted, its branches stretching like bony fingers toward the gray sky. Beneath it, the ground looked uneven, as if someone had disturbed the earth long ago. One of the officers marked the area and began to dig while the others scanned the surroundings. Birds scattered from the noise, their sudden flight echoing through the forest. After only a few minutes, a dull metallic sound came from the shovel, striking something beneath the surface. They exchanged uneasy looks before kneeling down to clear the dirt by hand. What they uncovered made their breath catch. A human hand, pale and skeletal, emerging from the soil. They stopped digging immediately and radioed the station. The site was soon surrounded by police tape, and a forensic team was called in. The soil was carefully removed layer by layer until the outline of a full body appeared. It was wrapped tightly in a faded floral bedsheet, the fabric stained with age. The grave was shallow, as if whoever buried it had been in a hurry. The coroner later confirmed that the body belonged to a woman who had likely been dead for more than a decade. Her skull showed signs of blunt force trauma, and her bones had fused in ways that suggested she'd been there for many years. There were no identifying objects, no rings, no wallet, nothing that could tell them who she was. The only clue was the floral bedsheet. An older officer recognized the pattern as one sold in a local department store that had gone out of business over 10 years ago. The discovery sent a quiet shock through the small town of Willowbrook. People who had long since stopped locking their doors began to feel uneasy. The letter had been real, and somewhere out there the person who sent it knew far more than they were saying. In the days following the discovery, the town of Willowbrook seemed to hold its breath. News of the body under the old oak tree spread quickly, whispered in grocery stores and coffee shops, each version of the story darker than the last. The police worked around the clock, digging through dusty old files, trying to match the remains with any missing person reported in the last 20 years. Dozens of names surfaced, but none matched the evidence. The body remained without a name, and the unanswered question of who sent the letter lingered in every investigator's mind. Then, just as the case seemed to hit a dead end, another envelope arrived at the police station. It was identical to the first. No stamp, no return address, the same uneven handwriting. The message inside was short but far more cryptic. She wasn't the only one. "You'll find another where the light dies." The room went still as the words were read aloud. The phrase was haunting, as if written by someone who knew exactly what the police would do next. Detectives debated what "where the light dies" could mean. Some thought it referred to an abandoned place, somewhere dark or forgotten. Others believed it was a metaphor for the outskirts of town, where the street lights stopped. After hours of discussion, one location stood out: a decaying farmhouse on the edge of Willowbrook that had been deserted for years. It once belonged to a man named Henry Caldwell, who had vanished mysteriously about 15 years earlier after his wife went missing. The next morning, investigators drove to the property. The house loomed against the horizon, its roof sagging and windows shattered. The front door creaked open with a single push, revealing a stale, suffocating air filled with dust and silence. Furniture lay overturned, and the wallpaper peeled like shedding skin. Down in the basement, the team noticed uneven floorboards. When they pried one loose, they discovered a small metal box hidden beneath. Inside were several old photographs, each showing a different woman smiling in various places around Willowbrook. The women seemed unaware that their pictures had been taken from a distance. The officers exchanged grim looks. Whoever had taken those photographs had been watching them closely, possibly for years. And judging by the handwriting in the letters, this was only the beginning of what he wanted them to find. The photographs found in the farmhouse basement became the center of the investigation. Each one was labeled with a number and a date written on the back in the same shaky handwriting as the letters. The dates stretched over a span of nearly 10 years. One photo stood out immediately: a woman wearing a dress with the same floral pattern as the bedsheet found in the grave at Hollow Creek. That connection tied everything together, confirming that whoever had taken these photos was directly linked to the murder. Investigators traced where the photos might have been, developed and discovered that all of them came from a small photo shop in town that had closed over 15 years ago. The shop owner, now retired, still remembered a man who fit a strange description. He recalled a quiet customer who always wore gloves, even in summer, and never gave his full name. He would wait silently while his photos were developed, refusing conversation and paying only in cash. When shown a photo of the farmhouse, the shop owner nodded without hesitation. It was the same man, Henry Caldwell. Caldwell's name was one the detectives already knew from the property records. He had worked as a handyman, often hired by widows or single women who lived alone. He had vanished shortly after his wife's unexplained disappearance 15 years earlier. Rumors at the time claimed he'd moved away to escape grief, while others believed he had something to hide. No one ever proved anything, and the case was forgotten. With this new evidence, police suspected that the body found under the oak tree was likely his wife. The letters seemed to be written by someone who wanted her discovered, someone haunted by what he'd done. Forensics examined the ink, paper, and handwriting from all the letters and the photos, confirming they belonged to the same person. Before they could locate Caldwell or verify if he was still alive, a third letter appeared at the station. It was left in the same quiet way as before. No witness, no camera footage, no clue of how it got there. This one was different, though. The words were short, almost final. "You're too late." It felt less like a warning and more like a confession. And for the first time, the officers realized they might not be chasing a killer. They might be chasing his ghost. The arrival of the third letter left the entire department uneasy. It was shorter than the previous ones, but the message carried a chilling sense of finality. The words, "You're too late," seemed to echo in everyone's mind. That night, as rain poured over Willowbrook, officers were sent once again to Hollow Creek to see if the writer had left behind any new clue. The road was slick, the trees bending under the weight of the storm. When they reached the old oak tree, something immediately caught their attention: fresh tire marks on the muddy ground, curving off into the woods. Whoever had been there had come recently, maybe just hours before. Following the trail, the officers discovered a burned-out vehicle hidden deep in the forest. Its metal frame was blackened and twisted, smoke still rising faintly from its edges. Inside, on the driver's seat, were charred remains barely recognizable as human. Near the passenger side lay a piece of paper that had somehow survived the flames. It was torn, half-burned, but the writing on it was unmistakable, the same shaky handwriting from the letters. Forensic experts later confirmed through DNA testing that the remains belonged to Henry Caldwell. In the trunk of the car, investigators found a small metal box, similar to the one from the farmhouse basement. Inside it were several drafts of letters, each one a version of the notes the police had already received. It became clear that Caldwell had written them himself before taking his own life. But the most revealing evidence came from his house, where they discovered an old, dust-covered journal. In its pages, Henry confessed to killing his wife during an argument years ago. He claimed it wasn't premeditated but an act of rage that spiraled out of control. Terrified and consumed by guilt, he buried her under the oak tree and abandoned his home. Over the years, his mind deteriorated under the weight of what he had done. The letters were his way of begging for the truth to come out before he ended his life. The last line in his journal read, "I couldn't live with what I buried. Maybe now she can rest." When the case closed, Willowbrook was never the same. The story of the letters, the buried woman, and the haunted man became a dark legend. A reminder that even when time covers the truth, guilt has a way of digging it back up.